Welcome to this session on guiding PhD students. Who is the intended audience for this talk? The primary audience is faculty in the process of guiding their first few PhD students. And the secondary audience are postdocs who are considering a faculty role. Okay, so if you are an early year PhD student, this will make sense after you graduate. If you are close to finishing, it will still make sense to you. And if there are any experienced faculty in the audience having graduated many PhD students, you should also be giving such a talk. So why am I doing this? You have gone through the PhD and the postdoc process as a student, and now you need to look at it from the advisor or the guide perspective. Okay, so now this is very different because in addition to doing research yourself, you are now responsible for another student's growth as a researcher, as a thinker, as a person. Okay, and this is a much larger responsibility than mentoring juniors on specific topics which all of us have done, guiding of interns or even MTech projects. So the whole idea behind this is that as you find your own way of guiding students, it might be useful for you to listen to another person's philosophy. So that's why this talk. Okay, now before we dive into the content of the talk, let me make some points very clear upfront. So the talk is structured as a series of questions that you can ask yourself, at any point. And I have given my own answers as one data point for you to think about. Okay, so it's not the answer. Now you may not agree with me, that's fine, it's just an example, and I'm not even saying that my answers are good answers. Okay, they are just my personal philosophy and approach. They may not work for you or your students or your institutional constraints. Okay, so you need to be aware of alternatives and pros and cons before you pick your approach. Okay, and some of you may know some of these points. So if you find one or two new ones, I think this talk would have served its purpose. So this PhD continuum is something that we are familiar with as a student, right? So we find that some students, sometimes the thesis topic is totally predetermined based on the advisor's research requirement. Okay, for some students they get an opportunity to work on open-ended topics. Then there are some advisors who are mostly open-ended but they put some boundaries, whereas some are mostly fixed but give some flexibility. So as a PhD student, we are familiar with this continuum that okay, there are these various types and different advisors are on different points of this continuum and so on. So now if you go to see what do students really want, okay, now it turns out that this is a survey conducted among you in this case, but yeah, if you look at the responses, so I got 14 responses, 10 from ET PhD students and 4 from ET alumni. Okay, so and I tried to do some kind of categorization of the responses. So many of them are talking about freedom to explore multiple topics. Okay, guide should be open and flexible, should make me feel that I am in the driving seat. Okay, and guide should be aware of the student's aim, should be able to help with engaging in various failures, should have a critical but positive approach. Okay, should be a mirror which shows you your strength and your weaknesses. Okay, so if you think about all this, one thing that stood out from all the responses was that all the responses were about individual growth. Okay, so it's about me, how I grow as an individual. There was almost no response which talked about things like fame or recognition. Okay, so recognition for research is a side effect as far as a student is concerned. But when you look at it from the institutional perspective, the institution often is working towards that recognition. So when these two goals clash, sometimes misunderstandings and mismatch of expectations happen. So as PhD guides, we should be kind of clear of where we stand and be able to communicate that to our students. So now if you look at the PhD continuum again, but this time wearing the hat of an advisor. Okay, so on one end of the spectrum, you have somebody who will primarily focus on their own research agenda. Okay, And at the other end, you will find somebody whose focus is on the student's growth. So one person will look for students with suitable skills, while the other will look for a problem that is suitable for the student. So I call one end of the spectrum as researchers who are also doing teaching, and the other end of the spectrum as teachers primarily who are also doing research. Okay, this is not a binary division. So there are many intermediate points. Okay, so in between, for example, you can have a somewhat flexible research agenda where the person will significantly factor in the student's interest, or you could have a highly flexible research agenda where you will mostly work with ideas that are exciting to the student. Okay. So the point to note here is each point on this continuum has its pros and cons. Okay. So one is not better than the other. What you have to do is choose what works for you. So now the question of choice is a bit challenging. Okay. So if you look at what are the things that you need to consider for taking a position on this continuum, you find that there are several constraints you have to keep in mind. One is the institutional constraint. What does the institute want you to do? Like I said earlier, the institute might want you to further the research agenda, while your students actually want to look at their own growth. Okay. You might have to look at peers. What are they doing? Are you too much of an outlier? You might have to look at your own impulses. What do you want to do as a researcher or as a teacher and so on. And of course, you have to also look at the student, right? What are the strengths of the students who's currently in front of you, how much flexibility you should provide, and so on. So the point is that you may have to take a different position at different times for different students. This is not enough. It also depends on what's your belief. So a lot of things about guiding PhD students stems from your beliefs. So what is your belief about what's a PhD? What is the process that the student should go through? And what's your role in that process as a guide? So all these things actually play a role in taking a position on this continuum.
So beliefs vary. So is there no correct answer or one answer to the expectation, ideal expectation for a PhD?
Is there no single correct answer to the ideal expectation from a PhD? In my experience, no. So there may be one answer which is kind of uniform to a department or uniform to an institute, but I don't see a single answer. I mean, I have met, like for example, if you take many institutes in UK, they have this 3-year PhD program. So that's a very different definition of a PhD itself than the one that I use. Okay, I mean, again, there is no right or wrong here. It's just that is their definition, this is my definition, and something else is somebody else's definition.
So, can we expect after a student graduates, can we expect from, what is that one thing that we should expect from all PhD students across the globe or across the university? At least, what is that minimal thing that we should expect across?
Well, I want to say research rigor, but I don't have any evidence to back up that everywhere you will see that. Okay, but I can say this much, from all good institutes, you will find that students who are graduated out of PhD are capable of serious critical thinking, are capable of create level activities on research problems. Okay, so let me move on. So the point here now is that you have to take a position on this continuum, and not only that, you have to make sure that your student understands your position so that there is no mismatch of expectations. Okay, so for that you have to start with saying, okay, what is my definition of a PhD? Okay, so this is my definition. So if you look at the entry from Wikipedia, in the context of Doctor of Philosophy, the term philosophy is used in a broader sense, according to its original Greek meaning, which is love of wisdom. And the term doctorate comes from the Latin docere, which means to teach. Right. So, my operationalization of this, so I kind of went back to the olden days of Pasteur and so on, and my operationalization is that students should get training to delve deep into the subject. So, they should be able to extend the boundary of knowledge, which pretty much all research is the goal of all research. Then students should be able to become aware of the assumptions, right? What are the qualifiers of the research? Should be able to examine the validity of what is the conventional wisdom in the area and so on. Okay, so that was my operationalization. All this is like 20 years old, but it has not changed much even today. So, and my operationalization of doctorate is that students should acquire expertise in the discipline and in pedagogy. Okay. So, as an example, what it means is that while reading a paper, a PhD student should be able to spot any unstated assumptions, okay, in that paper that is being reported, and should be able to conjecture what might happen if the assumptions were different, should be able to predict some of the findings before actually reading the results, okay, spot inconsistencies. This is all part of your critical thinking skills. So, that is why I said that one thing across the globe might be this critical thinking ability. Says that there are many activity slides, and these are all questions to think about, and it will be difficult to answer them accurately and comprehensively at one shot. Okay, so that is really not worth attempting a very good answer right now, and also it will be unproductive if you are not honest to yourself in your answers. Okay, so the suggestion is that you start writing the first couple of points that come to your mind, and then revisit them later. You can reflect and refine till you are satisfied. So, this is how you could go about making use of these activity slides that I have put in. And in each of them, there is some recommendation at the bottom which will help you to stay on track while you think about that particular question. So, in this case, the recommendation is keep checking for consistency of answers across questions. If at one point you say something for what do you expect, what is your definition of a PhD, it should be consistent with your response to saying what do you expect, what skills your students to have when they graduate. Okay. So, in this workshop what we will do is we will just pause on such slides. We will not do the entire activity. We will pause on such slides and do an open discussion. So, let us go back to this what is your definition of a PhD slide. Okay. So, I see some responses. Okay. Let me read them out. Anveshna says, I think PhD is a process of activating higher order thinking and reasoning abilities. Yes. Shitanshu says, training that enables an individual towards the development of love and ability to explore knowledge and push knowledge boundaries by application of critical thinking. This becomes a part of regular thinking process of the individual. Anita says, PhD is a program that teaches you very important life skills and higher order thinking skills. Prajesh's first thought is, get good in identifying what problems are important to solve. Yes, how to break down problems. Okay, JK's definition of PhD is rediscover the ability of questioning and get trained in systematic inquiry. Okay, very good. Lucian says a level of education that gives you abilities to think in many dimensions. That's an interesting point when solving challenges. Yes. Madhuri is saying PhD is the process to imagine structure and process of open problem solving. Pankaj says some skills that came to mind, inquiring and analyzing problems, developing ideas and potential solutions. Aditi is saying a discovery of how little we truly understand the field. Yes. Yeah. So, all of these are definitions of PhD. Okay, there are a few more responses coming in. Gaining ability to analyze complex problems into smaller manageable smaller problems. Yes. Define problems better and utilize methods that involve considerable rigor. Lakshmi's response. Ashwin says improve the knowledge and skill and contribute to the research. Is the process of identifying problems, investigating and positioning your finding at a global level. Yeah, this point has just arisen. PhD is to understand the question of domain which you are passionate about. Yeah. And Narsimha says PhD is a particular kind of service to different specific communities in society. And I have to agree with Shitanshu who said +1 to all, because I think I also say +1 to all. Shyam is saying research candidates' ability to identify and analyze a problem and design and develop a solution for it with enough rationale to convince at least himself or herself. Yes, that's a very good point. At the very least you have to be convinced, if not the referee. Okay, so keeping these definitions in mind, see again there are diverse definitions and you pick the one that resonates with you the most, right? And then you decide your position. Okay, so where is my position? Where am I on this continuum? Okay. So I have a highly flexible research agenda. Okay. So my primary focus is the students' learning and the growth while going through the PhD process. So initially it was a totally flexible agenda, but now I'm not totally flexible, I'm highly flexible. Okay. So there is an analogy which I am going to skip and talk about the example. So in CSE I had PhD students who were working on software architecture, wireless network design and mobile protocol optimization. They were all like kind of theta fields to each other. So I had some interest and prior expertise in these areas, but I was not an established researcher in any of them. So I developed my expertise along with the student. Okay, once I became an expert, I moved to ET. And here, if you look at what is an example of will work with ideas exciting to the student. So these are like, one student has worked on bilingual education, somebody else has worked on tinkering, a third person on analytics, a fourth person on teacher training and so on. Okay. So now all of this position on the continuum comes with some disadvantages, and I accept the disadvantages of not aligning multiple student theses in the same direction. Okay, so I'll talk about the pros and cons of this particular position, and then we can talk about other positions that you are interested in. Now if you look at what are the pros and cons of this position. Okay. So since it is highly flexible, a lot of learning happens, okay, technical and non-technical, and both the guide and the student are generally happy with the outcome. Okay. I have not had people come back and complain saying that you did me a great disservice. Also, students stay motivated to work, they learn many tangible and intangible skills, they gain confidence in many respects, they fearlessly venture into new areas and are unafraid to attempt hard problems. Okay. This is something, again, many alumni have validated this point. And this is something which I am actually proud of my students for. Okay. It's that fearlessness to say that, okay, I will learn whatever is required to solve this new hard problem that I am being faced with. Okay. And I get a kick out of seeing their growth as students and their achievements as alumni and so on. So those are the pros, and it satisfies me. The cons are that it's hard to have a strong and sustained long-term research output in any one given area, because different students will come and want to do different things. So both the student and the advisor pay a price for this deficiency, so to speak. Okay. Like for the advisor, it's not efficient for metrics such as publications or promotions and so on, because each student is using a different method, targeting different conferences, journals and so on, and you rarely get very well known in any one given area. Okay. Now as a result of that, the student also pays a price, right, because your guide is not already well known in their area of interest, so it takes that much longer for the student also to get established as an expert in that area. So these are the pros and cons of my position. Where would you like to be on this continuum? And we can do a little bit of pros and cons analysis of that point, irrespective of whether you would like to be there or not. If there is some point that you are interested in, we can do some pros and cons analysis of that point. Okay, I think anybody can unmute and speak.
Yeah, so even before I take this question up, I think the first question that came to my mind is Internally, I would ask myself what qualifies me, or I mean, it's not just qualification as a sense that am I ready to be there at that level? It's something I would ask myself, right? Even before I look at the continuum, am I ready for this sort of journey that you want to take with somebody? So I would ask that question, and that just was there in my mind. So I thought I'd speak.
Yeah, nobody is ready for it. Okay, so you have to kind of just jump into it, right? Okay, nobody gets ready, and then starts. So either you start off, or you start off, attending a workshop like this, and you say, okay, TK, I got some fun days. Now I'll give it a shot. Your first few experiments are your experiments, right? That's where you learn. Okay. So yeah, much like becoming a parent, that's what Prajesh says. Yes. Okay. So if you look at what Vikram is saying, I would prefer a general area of interest and give scholars freedom within that area. Madhuri is saying multiple directions but interesting ideas, right? So these are kind of close to what I am saying, mostly flexible but particular areas in the initial years. That's what Pankaj is saying. Okay. So yeah, mostly flexible is still kind of towards what I am saying. So the pros and cons that I have listed will continue to hold, right? See, the less flexible you become, okay, let me go back to this slide of the pros and cons and say what happens if you move in either direction. So I am in this highly flexible point, okay. So if I move more towards the more flexible, then the pros don't increase too much, okay. But the cons increase substantially, because you really have no focus at that point. You are just doing one thing here, one thing there, and so on, and the kind of pros that you get remain the same. Now if you move a little bit to the other side, where you become more constrained from this position, and you say that, okay, I am going to become less flexible. Okay. So there is some change that happens both in the pros and in the cons. Okay. So in the pros, what happens is that you might be able to integrate a number of your students' work to make an impact in one area. So that's a new pro that gets into the equation when you move from highly flexible to somewhat flexible. On the other hand, there is a new con also that comes, that your students may not really want to do that. So you may attract students who want a more templatized set of problems. Okay, so the students may feel that I don't have much choice but to work in this area, and only those students who are okay with it will start working with you. So that's a con that you might have. So it may be that you will be talking about only one type of ideas. So to me, that's, for me personally, I get a kick out of discussing varied ideas with varied people. So talking about the same thing with a lot of people over a period of time, it doesn't stay so interesting for me. Okay, slightly left to the center. Okay, Madhuri, go ahead.
It depends on sometimes. If I'm working in one direction, there's a possibility that I myself will get bored.
Yeah.
If I get something interesting, then definitely I like to divert than going in one direction. Then I'll forgo my impact in the area.
Yeah. Yeah, so I agree with you, Madhuri. I mean, we are kind of on similar positions here. So in that case, you have to be just aware of the cons and you have to move ahead. That's the point. Okay, so slightly left to center is what Shitanshu is saying. Okay. Okay, so let's move on. So what you can do is you can carry out this exercise on your own, not just now but even as and when you are growing, and you keep analyzing the pros and cons of your position. Okay, so the thing to do is to not only look for evidence for the pros, but mainly to ensure that you can accept the cons. So if you can live with the cons, then the pros will take care of themselves. Okay. So moving on, what do I look for in a potential PhD student? Okay, so the department has a bunch of criteria. So in addition to that, I personally look for passion to solve some educational problem. I look to see whether the student has energy to learn the skills and tools required to approach that problem. I look for enthusiasm in multiple activities. And like I said earlier, I enjoy working with such students. That's the reason why. And it also helps me to learn new topics and new skills. Okay, so that way I also grow, the students grow, and there's generally a little, we are both happy in some sense. So I am not a good fit for students who either prefer to work on predefined problems or who need well structured problems. So we come to another question, right? What would you look for in a potential PhD student? I think here we should pause and we should spend some time talking about it. So you can look at this recommendation saying that look beyond the technical skills. What do you want in your ideal student? Right? Just as students have said what they want in their ideal guide, what characteristics do you want in your ideal student? Balance of skill and will. Nice way. Yes, Madhuri, go ahead and unmute and speak.
Basically, since we are in education technology, the most important thing I look for a passion for this field and attachment to education. That is the first criteria which definitely very important for me.
Ashwin is saying ready to get skilled and become more passionate about the research over time. Yes, balance of skill and will, not necessarily only technical skill. Yes. Some more I am waiting for. Rumana is saying eager to take up unknown and unfamiliar tasks, eager to learn. Yes.
I think patience and ready to accept changes.
I didn't quite catch what you said. Devesh, was it?
Yeah, patience and ready to take failures also.
Patience and ready to take failures. Willingness to contribute to the domain and develop self as a philosopher and a teacher, formal, informal. Okay, Kapil, explorer, yes. Anveshna, ability and will to learn. Aditi, willingness to ask tough questions, yes. Dig deep into them and stick around when things get tough. I really like that. Perseverance and hard work. Okay, maybe one or two more responses. Perseverance in the face of adversity, passion to contribute to the area, underlying motivational reasons that the student brings in, fair knowledge or experience in the domain of interest, plus the passion to learn more. Non-conforming to rules but willing to work within known system boundaries. Okay. I am not looking for that in a potential student. I just accept the student when such a student appears. Yeah, go ahead, Shitanshu.
Yeah, I think that most of it are valid. However, even if one or two of these qualities are there in the student, then as a guide, it's our responsibility to help the student develop the other required.
Yes.
So we need to see what are those minimal set, one or two, which needs to be there, and then other things we can work with the student.
Yes. That's a very good point, and that brings me to the next slide, which is that it's unlikely that you will find an ideal fit with any student. Okay. So the purpose of this exercise is not to evaluate any student against your ideal and say that I am not going to take the student because it's not fitting with my ideal idea. So like Shitanshu said, the purpose is to identify what are those few minimal things that you are not willing to let go of, right? What are your expectations, which are reasonable, which of these you can let go of. Also you need to think about the student, right? Which of these are easy for the student, which of them are challenging, right? And also which of these are aligned with the student's own goals and expectations, right? If you expect that the student is going to tackle, let's say, a totally unknown hard problem, and if that's not part of the student's own goals, then there is a mismatch, right? So those are the kind of things that you have to think about, and as a result of which you will be able to arrive at the answer to what learning experiences should you design for the student. So depending upon your knowledge of the student and your own expectations, that's how you will get to designing the path for each student. So what are my goals with a PhD student? Okay, so one was what were the attributes that I was looking for. This is what are my goals. Okay, so my goals, this is a list. First is to learn to think deeply and clearly. Second one is to be able to anticipate details and complexity, even when thinking about a topic at a high level, and also even in areas that one is not an expert in. Thirdly, the student should be able to pick up new skills and tools, and finally contribute to research in the area. Okay, this is, other people have different goals. For some, the contribution to the research area takes a much more prominence than some of the others that I have listed here. Okay. So now this translates to specific goals for each student depending upon the area, topic and interest. So in my case, this is verbatim from my notes of 2001. Okay. So what would be your goals with a PhD student? Maybe what I can do is we can just take a look at the next slide also, and then we can come back and discuss this along with the next one. So when do I know that my student is ready to graduate? This is kind of related to the goals, right? So in my definition, student is ready to graduate when the student no longer needs help to identify and solve research problems. Okay, student has picked up some new research skills and is proficient in them, can write a paper independent of me, can contribute to discussions on other students' research that I have said earlier, and the one that I am most proud of is the last one, when I don't fully understand the details anymore. So the last chapter that you work on, I don't fully understand it, but I see that yes, there is a lot of rigor and careful thought that has gone into it. So that is when I know that my student is ready to graduate. So now let's look at both these questions together. What would be your goals with a PhD student, and when would you know that your student is ready to graduate? You can look at both of them together and we can discuss some of the points. So I prefer that you unmute and speak, that way there is some discussion happening. If you still prefer to type it in chat, that's fine. If you don't want to respond at all, then okay. Yeah, whoever has raised a hand, just unmute and speak.
Sir, this is Kapil.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, based on my experiences, what I think is the moment or the time when the students, is able to see the big picture, and he is able to, or he or she is able to develop that philosophy around that particular area. That could be one indicator.
Yes. Yeah, JK?
Yeah, I think a goal of a PhD, at least for me to be a student, should be sufficient expert in the area that they pick, or the problem that they pick.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what the problem is, but they should be sufficiently aware of what to do in that particular thing.
Yeah.
And when do I know that they will be ready? Just like what you said. The student comes in and says certain things, and I have absolutely no clue of what he is talking, but like as usual, I am able to understand what he is trying to say. Then that's the place where I will say, yeah, this guy is good. And I don't need him. He does not need me anymore.
Right. Yeah, Deepthi, go ahead.
Yeah, yes. So one goal might be that once the student has whichever area the student has picked up, if I give him or her a paper in that area, then quickly they are able to review it or identify the contributions and say pros and cons out of it, then that might be one of the.
Yeah. Correct. Okay, let me read out some of the chat responses. When the student is able to identify the problem, methodology, communications on his or her own, design studies, run studies, etc. Yes. When she starts owning the problem and takes more responsibility than anyone else. Yes, that's a good one. No, irrespective of whether the guide or not. Yes. Putting the same thing that is mentioned in a different way. Students should be able to convey research that make you only the listener and have almost no comments to provide. Actually, Ashwin, I don't understand what this is. Can you, if you can unmute?
It's the same thing what JK and others told me.
I
So
see.
you should be only the listener when they explain the research. And
Ah,
you should
okay,
have no
okay.
comments. That's all.
Acha, acha.
Even if you tell the comments, they should know that that is the limitation and they quickly come up with the
Okay.
But I have one counter argument for this as well. So there are cases where actually the quality and the quantity of work may not be sufficient, even though they might have understood and all those things. So we need to look into that aspect as well, I feel.
Yeah.
So maybe.
Yeah, the quality and quantity both are important. Yeah, I think I have one slide later which talks about that. Should be able to provide critical and useful feedback on someone else's research. Okay, when the student is able to position his or her research problem using different frameworks across disciplines. That's interesting. Anveshna, can you give an example?
Yeah, so for instance, Narasimha, when he talks about, say, chart theory, and then he moves to, say, distributed competence. So and then he is actually positioning himself. So I've seen him move across different disciplines using different, absorbing different frameworks from different disciplines and then trying to position his or her research problem. I mean, that was very interesting for me. So I think that's a good sign of where you have reached.
Yeah, very good. So, Narasimha, you are ready to graduate as per Anveshna's criteria. Okay. PhD student should be able to,
Good to know.
student should be able to take systems perspective with respect to his or her research problem. Pankaj is able to talk about their research to different audiences. Yes, plan and conduct studies independently. Anita, student is confident about his contribution. Yes, nice. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so now I'll just talk a little bit about concerns at different stages of the student's PhD. What do I worry about at different times? And then we'll go a little into the actual process. So what are my main concerns? So in the initial years, because we are with a highly flexible research agenda and going in the direction of the student's interest, I am usually concerned about, are we running in the right direction? Okay, have we found a suitable problem? Have we built enough background? Because often I don't have all the background that is required. And have we done due diligence to related work? I keep worrying about that. Have we missed anything important? Have we learned the necessary skills and tools? And also at the back of the mind is the question, will this solution idea lead to something novel? Is there a path to graduation eventually? So these are my main concerns at the initial stages of the PhD. Then when we come to the middle stages, once you have said that, okay, it looks like we are going in a good direction and it looks like there will be a solution. My concerns are, are these details working out as anticipated? Is there sufficient rigor? So this is what Ashwin was saying. Is there sufficient rigor in the work? Is there sufficient volume of the work? Can I see the finish line? Student may not be able to see, but can I see the finish line however far it is? And this is the time you start worrying also about the students' post-graduation plan, right? That what do they want to become after a PhD? Is there any internship or any other opportunities that you can or you should try to create? So those are questions that I worry about at the middle years. And in the final years, it's like how to get this person out, right? So is the story coherent? Is the writing coherent? Those are two different questions. And often making the writing coherent takes longer than making the story coherent, as all of you will know from your own experiences. Then are there sufficient publications? What is the next thing? And so on. So it's to me it's like an analogy with a flying an airplane, right? At some point you take off, you cruise, and then you land, right? So sometimes with a student I am even on the taxiway looking for the runway. It takes a while to even find the runway. So that has also happened. Okay, so let's see. What would be your concerns? Rather than you try to state these, maybe you can react to what I have said here. So these are my concerns. If you want to say that, look, this is something additional that you should worry about in the initial years, or so, or something else is not a valid concern, we can spend some time discussing these concerns. So thereby you will build your own approach of what you should worry about. Yes, Lakshmi, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think at some point in time we will also be concerned about how confident, the final year I'm talking, how confident is a student of self. In the middle years, the student feel lost, or is the student feeling that there is no light at the end of the tunnel. I think somewhere, across these 3 years, or in the initial year, is a student feeling that there is sense of growth, or there is a lot of learning that's happening. So that's something that I would want to see across these 3 years.
So does the student feel that there is learning happening? That should also be a concern. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I think one. Oh, so yeah, Ashwin, go ahead.
No, it's okay, Desh. Go ahead.
I think at each of these stages, even publications. So you start with publications in say B-rated conferences and all, and slowly you progress. You see that maturity in the writing of these papers, along with the acceptance in the community.
Right.
So the kind of comment you are receiving from reviewers, and also that is also a point of reflection of if we are going in the same direction, or there are some serious issues.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. Ashwin, yeah.
Ashwin, so I have slightly a different point, which this may not be directly intersecting with the points which you have mentioned. See, I see the problem with some of the current generation students, where actually they get enough skills that is good compared to their peers who are not working in the PhD. So they are working in some industry or something, and they start losing the amount of motivation which they had earlier because of the amount of money, the stipend they get here. So that actually is one of the concerns I see nowadays.
So you're saying people who come from industry lose motivation because of the stipend? Or are you saying people who are here lose motivation because their industry counterparts have a lot more money?
Yeah, counterparts are giving a lot more money, and for lesser skilled people.
For lesser.
In third year, they are skilled too much, and I see a little bit of low in the motivation and all those things.
I agree. That's a major concern, but I don't know what the solution to that is. Yeah, because it's just something that we all accept, right? Even as PhD students, we accept that, okay, I am in this game because I am interested in the research, and I have let go of this, career path and so on. Okay, yeah, Shitanshu, go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the crucial thing I feel is like from starting to end after even graduation. One thing we need to ensure that students are finding the whole exercise meaningful, and their contribution meaningful.
Yeah.
Just getting a thesis accepted, lot of papers accepted, but at the end you do find that whatever I did it was just a formality to get a paper or certificate degree, and I didn't feel that I contributed anything which according to me is meaningful. That's the problem. And also from the skill development point of view, the student should be able to by the end find out a lot of meaningful directions for his or her own future path. Doing this or this or this will actually satisfy the person in his or her life.
Yeah, that's a good point actually, because all these points that I have written are from my perspective. I have not really factored in the student in these points at all. It's a good point. Thanks for pointing that out. Yes, Ashutosh.
Sir, at a number of times you had mentioned, in various conversations, it was about that the PhD students also focusing on certain different domain, maybe also a different skill, along with what we are working in our thesis, and then seeing to it that the level of involvement and seriousness goes. Is seen in parallel to that skill as well. So it has like two points. Like one is that you are able to transfer those skills, and secondly, it's not that you are just becoming a highly specialized person in one area, but you actually also have that breadth. So at a number of times this has come in our conversations at different points. So I thought probably
Yeah, correct. JK?
Yeah, so I mean, I have like two points. One is to counter what Ashwin said. I mean, so yeah, if you start comparing with your peers outside, then then the inherent motivation of my argument to that is the inherent motivation to PhD is more of a transactional PhD rather than a actual PhD. And see, at the end of the day, I would say a lot of bearing to PhD comes in from the perspective that the guide has on the student or on the problem. So, a lot of characteristics, even if they don't reach an ideal state that a guide wants, there are a lot of implicit expectations that we ourselves set. Which we try to make sure that the PhD student achieve in one way or the other. I mean, they may not achieve all N expectations, but there will be like, I will go back to that minimum viable product. I think as a PhD guide, each of us would want a minimum viable product coming out of, our supervision. So there would be some measures that we would take from our side. So if a student is not feeling confident, I think we are letting down ourselves in that process. So these 2 points from my side.
Yeah.
So one point I wanted to sort of raise is that we are positioning this entire thing as a either or. That is, I think you mentioned that line where you said that a PhD student understands that they're letting go of something the moment they join the PhD program. I think that itself is a problematic assumption. Because perhaps if we add a few more extra skills and find ways to align our PhD program with what would be required, let's say with a high-paying job in the industry, which is just a little bit more work than whatever we are already doing, I think that may put us not simply at a lower level, but more of a upper management role, which will pay a higher salary or package. I think we need to sort of rephrase that problem, I think, sir.
I agree with you, Vikram. So the thing is that what is required is for the industry to also recognize the expertise. So that is where we have not been very successful, either in CS or in ET, even in CS, because the industry kind of recognizes expertise that is built bottom up in their own format. So one way to solve this might be to convince industry that look, the value of the expertise and why a PhD should not be hired at a somewhat on the lower rungs but somewhat on the higher rungs, right? But then they start having management expectations and so on. Do you want to respond back to what I said?
I'm not sure about the CS thing, sir, but I think with respect to the EdTech program, I think we have opportunities for the fact that we are brand new. At least in India, we are in a niche area. So we are in a position to set the direction of the conversation. The industry does not have the upper hand here. Perhaps we have been looking at this particular domain more from a traditional point of view, which is why I've been having conversations with a lot of our MTechs. I spend time in the department and I see a lot of our MTechs and PhDs moving towards the more traditional. I think perhaps there is some orientation already ingrained. But I think we need to try to reset the discourse, maybe a bit more aggressively. I'm not sure if the word aggressive is the right word, but I think proactively, I would say.
So I would love to have you come down and talk more about this, Vikram. I agree with you, and we should do that. And if you have a solution which we can implement, I would really love to hear that more and attempt
So
it.
that's the thing, Sam. I mean, it's a bit of a risk-taking task here. I think I've sort of jumped into it all in. Even the startup work, I think, is one such move in changing the discourse. I may succeed, I may fail, but I think just by getting all in will change the discourse. But yes, sir, we can have
Yeah,
conversation.
sure. Okay, let me. JK has raised a hand again. Okay, go ahead, JK.
Yeah, I mean, so just to add on to what Vikram is suggesting, I think one important thing for even in the industry is to recognize the merit of a ET PhD. I mean, there should be sufficient involvement with the industry of at least LMs or PhDs on a consistent basis. So this is something that I've realized while interacting with people, interacting with multiple industries these days. So they respect the knowledge, the rigor that you bring in, but you don't interact with them very often. And for them, research output is something that cannot be immediately brought to market. I mean, whatever we do in terms of returns for them, it doesn't actually translate to product or ROI of that in that perspective. So I mean, somebody who it needs deep entrenchment with the industry professionals, and there should be consistent interaction, consistent dialogues, and I mean, it's like a long haul. You have to be there so for example, what you are doing with Next, I think they value the consultancy that you do and the students, but what we haven't maybe been able to do so great is we haven't been able to find out other Next educations or other set of people who would be more interested in this particular space. So learning and development of industries is something that where we somebody needs to really do a fast prototyping when it comes to skill transfer and other kind of thing. So T-Launch was a fantastic, I mean, the idea is a very good one, but what we don't have is fast prototypes.
Okay. Yeah, Anita, I was about to call on you to speak.
Yeah, so I completely agree with what Vikram and JK they are suggesting, right? Definitely, the type of skills that we are targeting, the type of work that we are doing in the ET department, it is not percolating down to the industry. Whereas when I worked with the Singapore education department, so there, the type of research that they are, taking ahead, and even in the industry people, they respect that, okay, if this researcher is telling me that, okay, this is how it works, or this is what should be the changes or modifications done in this particular product, the same if it happens in India as well, I think it will be really good for our department as well as for the domain as such.
Okay. Let me read out a few of the points from the about to graduate students, and then we will move on. Pankaj is saying that in the initial years, the concern should be, am I approachable and available to the student? Yes. Does the student perceive that I am interested? That's a very important one. Yes. Narsimha saying for the final year, does the student see various opportunities in the society where he or she can have significant impact drawing from the PhD work? Yeah, that's a worry. Yeah. Rumana saying also a check on mindset of the learner. Does the student identify or acknowledge him or herself as a researcher or an expert in the field? I really like this one, yeah. Because often we have to keep on telling you that you are the expert now, you are the expert now. Yes. It is expected that you move towards the center of zone of proximal development, but do you really feel you are there? Yes. Also be able to protect your personality well, aware and confident of the kind of responsibilities you can take. Lucian is, I always think of what I can offer to the community, especially towards the end. What will I do with my schooling as I exit my studies? Right, very good. So what does this section contain? It contains points on how do I begin to work with a PhD student. Okay, I ask a lot of seemingly irrelevant questions. Why do I ask them? My main thing is that you should know your students as persons, okay, beyond entities in an academic setting. And then there are many examples. For example, getting to know Yogi's interest in bilingual education, or Rito's interest in photography and visuals, which finally went towards visual analytics, Rajesh's interest in CS education, Ashu's in tinkering. Then there are some points about what I do and what I don't do upon starting off with a student on a topic. Okay, like for example, I do a lot of my own thinking and have my own notes. So here is an example. This is from July 2008, my notes for Sameer's PhD. And this is just the topmost level of the notes, and then there are pages of detailed notes which come after that. So that's one of the things that I do. And what I don't do is wait for the student to produce the notes. So why do I have my own notes? Because I feel that the exact words are very important, and student may not exactly write it down in that way, and audio recordings don't work. So earlier I used to write in my own notebook and share them gradually with the student as they mature. Okay, nowadays, as many of you may have noticed, I just grab your notebook and write in it. So that's about how to begin. And then there are points about what do I do to keep a student on track. Discussing goals, having weekly meetings, not waiting for the student to initiate meeting requests. I think you are familiar with all of these. Again, some examples. Like in JK's case, we went from the QEEE training to constructive alignment, where we focused on the strength and what went right. In Lakshmi's case, we discussed milestones several times to make sure that we don't get into too many secondary projects. Kapil's story everybody knows. We had to involve peers to help stay on track. In Kavya's case, I revised the timelines according to the situation. For Rekha and Deepthi, again adjustments according to their college load. All of these are part of what to do to keep a student on track. Okay, and why do I do that? I do that because I acknowledge that students have their own lives and their own constraints. So I don't put undue pressure on them to follow my timelines. So if a student is not on track, it's very useful to assess if there are other factors at play, whether there are other constraints, his health an issue, and so on. It's definitely not useful to judge students or label them as bad students. Okay, and this is again a very important point. I often tell students, many of you have heard it yourselves, it's okay if you haven't made much progress, come for a meeting and let's talk. Okay, so why is this important? So this is important because students may feel that you expect to see some significant progress in each meeting, and their idea of significant is often very different from yours. So this is the trap, and they get into a spiral of I'll do some more work and meet the guide, and the more time passes, the more their stress increases. So as a guide, you have to periodically reset this. You have to periodically say, okay, we'll forget history, let's start again. So this is something that I would advocate to all guides, to keep that open door for students to comfortably walk in and talk. Okay, what do I do to speed up a student's progress? Again, these are very standard ones that you know. So let's just look at some examples. So there is the junior-senior connection that we often try to do, which is, in this case, there's an example of Lucian talking to JK, and there's also the peer-to-peer connection. In this case, there's an example of Prajesh and Lakshmi talking to each other a lot for their thesis work, and of course, all of us have used research resources and so on. This is again a very important one. What do I do when I feel stuck? Okay, so this happens more frequently than you can imagine. So, especially because of this flexible research agenda, you get stuck often. Okay, so, what I do is talk to colleagues and reevaluate whether it's okay to flounder. And if you look at some examples, for pretty much all my students, I have sought discussion with colleagues on what research design to use, what data to collect, and how to analyze it. Okay, I have also consulted senior students and alumni who have knowledge on some specific topic necessary for a current student. So, the key point here is that since I am working on topics that are exciting to the student, I am not the expert researcher on that topic, and I am always keeping it in mind that I don't want the student to pay the price for my ignorance. So, that's one reason why it's worth talking to colleagues, getting feedback quickly as you guide your own student. So, I am not.
I think
Most.
this you do regularly, many times or just a few times initially.
Yeah, so this actually most of it happens initially, so initially it depends upon how much the student is willing to open up also. If the student is willing to be open and share, then most of it, so I remember a fair amount of it. So, but then later on I might discover some new facet which might also play a role, but most of the, I mean, it's not a very fine grained knowledge, right? I mean, it's a course level knowledge of what their interests are. Yeah, who was that? Vikram has some point. One way to reorient PhD scholars is to have internships. Yeah, that is something we are now working on. A lot of students are also feeling that we should start doing internships even for PhDs in their third year. Yes. So, upon starting off with a student, I think this is fairly straightforward. There was one question which came up in the previous session was, what did you do with your first PhD student? Did you do all this, or did you do this for your own PhD? So, so my guide didn't have weekly meetings with me, so it was all on demand. So it was driven by me. Whenever I needed, I could meet. I could ask for a slot and meet. But I was fairly systematic to begin with, so I did maintain detailed notes of my own, which is what helped me, and I think that just continued the practice as when I became a guide. And that's something which I think all my students also do. They maintain notes in their own ways. It's not exactly the way I would maintain, but whatever works for you is fine. Okay. Shyam has two questions. How do you identify the right publication for your students' work? So, I am pathetic at that. Okay. So, the way I identify is I ask colleagues who know better than me. And now colleagues includes all of you. So, I am really bad at identifying the right publication. So, we will come to that, why publish question in a few, and then you will know why I am bad at it. Okay. Okay. The other question he is asking is, how do you deal with negative feedback of the RPC and the reviewer? Yeah, that's a very valid point, both from a student perspective and from a guide perspective, right? So, as a student also, we have to deal with this negative feedback, and we keep hearing that, look, this is formative assessment and don't take it personally and so on and so forth. As a guide also the same thing holds, so often, sometimes I have seen guides get defensive in when their student is presenting, right? So it does happen that we become defensive at that time, right? So that's the one thing to avoid, right? So whenever negative feedback comes, it is, at least my strategy is to first see whether I am being defensive or not. If I am being defensive, then nothing is going to work. So I say first I drop my defensiveness. I listen to the feedback. Then there is a simple evaluation to make, is this valid, or do you think it's not valid, or it's partially valid, or wherever it falls. Okay. So if it is not valid, then I just say, okay, this is not valid, I don't agree. I may still be wrong, but I don't agree. I have thought about it, I don't agree, and I move on. On the other hand, if it is valid, then there is no question, right? I mean, I just have to take that criticism and work on it. And if it is partially valid, again there is a trade-off between how much you want to do. Like sometimes a reviewer will say you need more N, right? So yeah, go ahead, Shyam.
Yeah, no, sir, please go ahead.
So sometimes, especially in our area, if there is qualitative work, reviewer will say, okay, you need more N, or what's the generalizability and things like that. So you can't make a student wait for one more year to do that work. So you have to take a call at that time. Sometimes you just send it to a different forum. Yeah, Shyam, you had to say something?
No, it's okay, fine.
Okay. I don't know what JK has said. Student get longer emails and subsequent meetings will be quick and long. Okay. Okay, let's move on. So yeah, this example is just for fun. Notes, we talked about all this. What do I do to keep a student on track also we have talked about. What not to do also we have talked about. So this again as a guide, there is a very fine line that you have to walk of putting some pressure but not too much pressure. So that's something that one has to learn. Oh, I see that Lakshmi has raised a hand.
Yeah. So I I don't know if it is part of the process or maybe I missed it, but also somewhere, figuring out the identity of the student, where the student wants to be or identified as. Let's say, for example, even in I'll take the example of a department because it's easy for me to say. Like in our department, are you a CS researcher or are you a learning science researcher? Somewhere I think this question comes out when you are in your third year, because I remember having a long conversation with Rajesh on this. So figuring out or helping the student identify themselves, and I think this kind of points to the question that Shyam has been asking, right? So once that identity or where they want to be identified with people, then it becomes easy to say these conferences or these journals. Yeah, so I don't know if this.
Yeah, maybe it's a notion of identity where you want to be, and every work can be shown in multiple lights. Yeah, that's perhaps a good way to decide. So one question is about publications. So this again is a page from my journal, my position from 20 years ago. Okay. So I did look at, there was some UK study on why publish, and I came across it, and some of the responses that were given in that study were that it's for financial reward, research funding, career advancement, visibility. Communicate results to peers was fairly way down in that list. Okay. So then I thought about it, because when I was a student, I had a very strong reaction to not publishing till you had something according to you was worth telling. So it took me a while to get rid of that bias, and eventually I took a position that, look, my reason for publishing, what makes sense is either if I have something that I feel is really worth saying, or if I am training students for research. So this reason works for me, because a lot of students have, including master students, so I've sat with them and done the line by line editing, and many of them have said that that process was very useful to them. Just the think aloud that you do while you edit the paper. So that is a part of the learning to think clearly process. So that's very valuable to me. And the contribution to the research in the field, visibility, they have been secondary issues for 20 years. So that's why I don't put in too much thought on where to publish. And after a few years, I just got lazy. I just decided to ask colleagues and get help on that aspect. So the goal is to aim for top conferences and journals for PhD students, and conferences that students can travel to for master students. So my publications have not been very successful in terms of high impact or research visibility for two reasons. One is because of the diversity in the areas, and the other is because my approach to the publication is a training approach, not a making a claim approach. So this is my take on publications, and of course I don't recommend this position, but yeah, we can talk about what is a better position and so on. Okay, floor is open. Yeah, Rito, go ahead.
Okay, I just one of the ways to think about publication that I'm fairly being exposed over here is to get the work out there and get the feedback, and that gets back to initially even during my bachelor's, when one of my teachers said that okay, even if it's a mechanical engineering subject, you don't have to believe or get yourself stuck into the textbook equations. You can pick up the pen and paper and then solve that equation yourself and then see whether it matches. And even if it is a research paper, somebody had done that. So do that and ask questions. And if you find that okay, this is a new way to do it, put it out somewhere so that somebody else can verify whether you have done it. So in that context, I would say that what to publish is if we have something which is one point which is new, okay, and there I again refer back to your thing. It is easier if you have a new problem. If it's maybe a fairly more acceptable if it is a new problem. If it's not a new problem, it's a new solution. We have to have some more arguments. If it is not a new solution, it's a new method to analyze the solution. We would need a little bit more arguments. If it's a same method but new results, we would need arguments. And if it's the same result but we are interpreting it more in a different way, then also we need more arguments. So to see that whether, and all of these arguments and the thought process is maybe fairly within either a guide and a student or within a group of people. So whether it's that argument stands, and of course before publishing we think that oh yeah it stands, but it's still a two mind interaction or something, end mind interaction, and then putting it out there and then trying to see that whether it works or not maybe is one of the spirits of publication.
Yeah, I fully agree with that.
So, and then if we factor in time in all of this, then automatically there would be certain kind of constraints, and with constraints there would be certain kind of with constraints there might be certain strategies that would emerge by itself, because there is a constraint of time and there is a constraint of the self-perception of what is the impact of that publication, or the self or to clarify that okay, this is our argument and where do we clarify it. So one of my teachers at the beginning again said that send it to the best possible place. If you have something that you are getting, send it to the best journal, get rejected from there, but you will get more thought points to think about.
Yes.
Yeah, some of the things I thought.
So Aditi is saying on the chat, we must publish because being able to articulate a position and defend it is what being a scholar is about. Yes, I fully agree with that also. It took me a long while to learn that, but so yeah, I was kind of reactionary to seeing a lot of people churning out publications. But I agree with this position today, of course, but maybe even 15, 20 years ago. Yeah, Shitanshu, you have something to say?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about authoring as compared to publishing. So publishing is important as discussed by Vipro and with what Aditya is saying. But authoring is also very important. So a regular authoring gives a iterative opportunities to revisit our story.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So in the whole process of doing PhD or completing one big research project, we need to keep doing that exercise. The moment you write, you find the gap, you realize the gap. I'm talking even if we are just talking about the guide and the student, between them also, authoring is a tool to actually identify where we are missing, what is the thing that we need to do extra, all those things. And this should keep going. It's a iterative and a continuous process. So after authoring, obviously, go ahead and publish it to get feedback from not just 5 people, but from the whole community.
Yeah, I agree. Rito, just before that, if Prajesh is back, let's just give him a chance. Prajesh?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I was just wondering about your position on maybe writing papers so that you can interact with people of that community. So has that not been a goal for you?
Not so much, Prajesh, because it comes from my position of working more with the idea that is interesting to the student, right? So I'm kind of a nomad in that sense. So if, like, for example, when Yogi was there, it was bilingual education. It's not like I really wanted to interact so much with experts in bilingual education. Or let's say it's Ashu now on tinkering. So while I'm happy to listen to and interact with experts on tinkering, I don't feel the urge to become a research expert on that. So that is where my bias and my mindset plays a role in how publications work out for my students.
Okay, yes, thanks.
Yeah. Rito, you had a point?
I wanted to follow up in Prajesh first. So if you say that, which expert hat would you like to wear?
So I am actually a process expert. I am not so much a content expert. But if I had to choose a domain, it would be CS education research for me, because that's the domain I've spent the maximum amount of time doing research as well as teaching in.
Okay, and in that context, what is a publication output for a process? Would it be aligned to something like
models,
PBIR or something like that?
Yeah, models, right? I mean, so the LCM model is something that I'm happy to have got to. I know Aditi and Shitanshu are waiting to see whether I say the LEAP model. So those are, so models excite me, but they are notoriously hard to publish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing was in follow with what Shitanshu was saying. We writing as a tool to think, and that's what Aditi is also saying, that we as a scholar we have to put it out so that we can defend.
Yeah.
At the same time, here I also find that a lot of them are computer science graduates, or they're like super coders. So for them also, like not only writing but compiling codes, that is also something that needs to be done on a daily basis, kind. Because create a thing or create and see what fails or what is the kind of bugs which are there is also as important in this application oriented educational research or ET research and then write about it. So it's quite interesting to see that okay, what we do daily, it would be to write some codes and also write some parts of a piece of thing that somebody is on.
Yeah, so so in I don't know whether these journals are still around, but there used to be a journal called Software Practice and Experience, which was exclusively devoted to this finding bugs, and not just finding bugs, but talking about the practice of creating software. Yeah. So Anveshna has a question. Shitanshu, just a moment. Let me read out Anveshna's question and then we'll come to you. Her question is how to navigate the trade-off between quality and quantity of publications. For me, it has brought both ethical and practical considerations. Yeah, so again, I am not the best person to answer this question. So maybe somebody else would like to take this question. So my personal trade-off is towards the quality, not so much to the quantity. There is a price to be paid and I pay the price. My students also pay the price. Yeah, Shitanshu, you can go ahead now.
Yeah, my thing would also be quality. Even if you are publishing a smaller story, it has stress and sound. I mean, quality can also have some baseline that just has to be satisfied, and then beyond that, anything is acceptable. Okay, my thing was I wanted to ask a question about from your experience and memory. Can you give some examples where your own assumptions or your interests have impacted students' thesis and its direction? But see, given you have tried to be on the most free edge, you give the whole the complete freedom or highest freedom. But if still your assumptions, maybe you have realized later on, oh, I was assuming this and you went to this direction.
Yeah. Yeah, so these mistakes you make with your first few students. Okay, so with my first student, I was kind of idealistic and saying that PhD is about examining the validity of axioms. So that was a big thing, that was a big assumption for me, right, that this is what a PhD is about. And the student was also very much interested in thinking. So he had done his masters also with me. His name is Vikram Jamwal, and what he did was, like, his masters could have easily gone ahead and become a PhD in another 2-3 years, and he told me, "Arey Sridhar, I see that, but it's not interesting to me. I want to investigate this new question." Okay, so, and I was also idealist. So today I might have told him that, boss, you get your PhD and then investigate the question. So then I was a bit naive. So I said, yeah, sure, let's do that. So we went ahead to investigate an axiom which was held by most people in the software industry, which was about the structure of an object. And we did a fairly decent job of it, but we paid a heavy price because nobody wanted to listen to it, nor did, and we were no-name people from some place saying that. We were not big shots in the area or anything. So, there was a lot of discouragement that the student had to go through with reject after reject coming in. So, and then later I realized that, look, all these fundamental assumptions, you still have to be pragmatic. So subsequent students do work on meaningful problems, hard problems, but not that fundamental. Yeah, Ashwin.
Hi. So my question is actually regarding one PhD student versus a guy. So if a guy is willing to be in the academic position, then generally the quality of work is seen in a high impact factor journal. So now generally what tends to happen is students do their work And once the work is about to finish, they get a conference, they publish in a conference and move on. They may not wait for sufficient amount of time for like more than 1.5 years to make it a very quality substantial work and send it to a very quality journal. So now, how do you actually address that? So do we have to tell anything regarding the amount of conference or publications required?
Yeah. Yeah, so Rekha has an interesting suggestion in the chat. Guide has to write the paper. Yeah, that's true. And Lakshmi's also point that that's where the templates come in handy. So we have these paper writing templates for action research in our department. That's also true. So see, there is another trade-off here. So the trade-off that is conference versus journal, and I have typically leaned towards the conference because that's more fun for the student to go to a conference and meet people. And it's like, some students do it just once, and after that, especially master's students, they never come back to it. And so that's one memory that they carry for their life, that okay, I went to an academic conference. So I have a preference for conferences, and luckily in CS conferences count at least on par with journals. And so the conference deadlines actually drive the whole show for me. So, and when you say that, look, if you are able to get into that conference, we can go to it, that is sufficient motivation for the student. So on the flip side is that the conference work is not as quote unquote rigorous as the journal work. And now when I move to ET, I find that in many other disciplines, conferences are not really counted, so we have to look at journal publications. And so getting there, I think, is possible with more motivation on the guide side as well as the student side. Both have to have that approach to say that, okay, let's go at the journal paper. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's the best I can say.
Yes, you answered for it.
Okay.
I have one quick question, which is actually continuing with those comments. So the thing is, when actually a particular faculty is more flexible towards what they choose, so we may not be the subject matter expert. We just comment based on the experience. So now, how much will it impact the student? Because we may not be telling the exact.
Yeah, significantly. It can impact the student significantly. So that is where, when you take this position of a highly flexible researcher, you have to also, along with it, take this position of being able to seek discussion with colleagues. So you cannot afford your student to pay the price of your ignorance. So that is something which you have to be always aware of, that you are not the expert in the area, so you seek out expertise. See, what you are an expert in, that you have to capitalize on, right? So, like, if I have to speak about myself, my expertise is in guiding students through the process. So the topic, I have now reached a point where the topic does not play a very big role in my guiding the student, because I can guide the student to the correct sources of expertise. Yeah, but finding those correct sources of expertise is important. And if at any point you feel that what will somebody else think about me, then your student can pay the price for it. Yeah. So Anita has a good question here. If the student is excellent when it comes to innovations, ideas and presentations, but not good or willing to write a paper, how do we motivate such a student? So I don't have a very immediate pat answer to that. I think it will depend on student to student. You have to make the student see the benefit in the exercise. Otherwise, why do the exercise? I would agree with the student. Yeah, maybe that student should. Yeah, go ahead, Anita.
Yeah, so many times we come across the students. They are like their ideas, their solutions. They come with fantastic ideas and innovations, but when we say that, see, if you have to get some funding out of it, or you have to present somewhere, you have to write something about it, then they are like, they just take a backseat, then they don't even bother to write about it. So how do we,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, I think we underplay the importance of this communication skills, right? We keep focusing so much on the content and the function that we don't pay enough attention to the communication or the form and all.
yeah.
So it is a drawback in our system itself. I think systemically, uh, it's a drawback, and we have to keep doing these communications skills courses, and very specific, very targeted in order to overcome that. Often it's a matter of the student being daunted by the whole exercise, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. JK, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was about to say, I mean, show him how a subpar innovation or a subpar work is getting more visibility than what you you could have done.
Yeah, yeah.
Remind him, अगर तुम करता तो देखो आज तुम वहाँ पहुँचते.
Good point, good point.
Good point.
Good point. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like the last straw. I mean, after all the constructive thing, you just show, I mean, yeah, see, this is where you are because you didn't write. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Kapil.
So I think there are too much expectations from one student. Like, he may not be good at everything. So eventually the person can, progress those skills. So collaboration or making teams or talking to peers, that could be the key.
Yeah, yeah. That's also a very good point. You just get somebody to help you with it.
Yeah, because I remember during my thesis writing, my command on language is just working English, but the research English or the articulation skills, I took a lot of help from Shitanshu and Anurag, everyone, from you, sir, like Samir, sir. So that evolves, I guess.
Yeah, very good point, Kapil. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but no, this thing actually is there in our department, I believe. No, ET department, the type of peer-to-peer communications and all. But many places this doesn't exist. I mean, it's lacking. That's what I feel. I mean, that's what is my experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes, as a PhD scholar, many students, they feel lonely because they are on their own. They are doing their own work with the only person who they are interacting is with the guide. So many places where it's technology related research that they are doing, I feel this loneliness is there that affects them a lot. That is again one more important point that we can take up. Like I feel, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, Lakshmi.
Yeah, I think then that takes me, Anita asked a very nice question. I think that takes me to the next question to Sir, that you will have to sometime talk about how to set culture and that process of something becoming a culture. I think that's not, I know this is not in this particular thing, but sometime setting that process as a culture, I think it's an important thing to learn. I think that is something that I would be also interested to learn.
Yeah, so just to close the workshop before, and those who can stay for longer, we can continue the discussion. So, but for those who need to leave, let me just quickly close. At the end, there are there's a summary of beliefs that I hold. So again, the reason for putting this slide is not to thrust my opinion on you, but to make you aware that you need to examine your own beliefs. Where are you on these beliefs? So for me, it is, I'm a teacher who also does research, and the delta of growth for the student matters more than the contribution. And to me, guiding students is a sacred responsibility. And there are some principles that I follow, which is like know your student first, other work later, and guide proactively, give enough time. So once again, the point is that you should try to articulate these principles for yourself, and then there are some actions that I do, which we have talked about already, maintaining notes and so on and so forth. And the bottom line is that it doesn't matter what point on the spectrum you are. If you are not losing sleep over your student's thesis, you or your postdoc, whoever, then you're not doing your job. Okay, so once again there are disclaimers that these are my personal philosophy, and there may be many disagreements, which is fine. Do what works for you.